Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? The answer is Deals. This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On this show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions, capital raising, joint ventures, strategic alliances, real estate, affiliate and sponsorship deals, franchising, and more. My name is Corey Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for over 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the DealQuest Podcast. Let's get started. Jens Nielsen is a commercial real estate investor, operator, and business coach in Santa Fe, New Mexico. After a 27-year career in IT and telecom, he transitioned to a full-time real estate investor and helped build a portfolio of more than 2,700 apartment units and over 100,000 square feet of industrial real estate. He's raised over $10 million in private capital and has firsthand experience navigating acquisitions, operational scaling, investor communications, and market downturns. What makes Jens' perspective unique is that his focus is on what happens after the deal closes. He believes many businesses and real estate operators struggle because they can't find deals, not because they can't find deals, but because the business becomes too dependent upon the owner. Today, Jens works with entrepreneurs and operators to improve execution, leadership, and scalability so growth creates freedom instead of chaos. Well, Jens, listen, anybody who listens to this podcast knows, we'll hear it on my final question about my highest value in life being freedom. So that part of your bio definitely resonates. I love that you have this interesting background in going from IT to real estate investing and now continuing to invest, but also doing some coaching and consulting and leadership stuff with folks. So, but before we get into all that, I want to take you back to when you were a little kid growing up, maybe 8, 10, 12 years old, because I'm guessing a real estate investor and leadership consultant and that kind of stuff, or maybe even IT wasn't it back then, but you tell me, what did you want to be when you were a kid?
Yeah, that was absolutely not on my radar, that's for sure, the real estate. Yeah, I mean, grew up in rural Denmark, right? Grew up kind of in the countryside, my parents were blue collar workers, and didn't really have much idea of the bigger world that was out there, right? This is before the internet. We had one TV channel in Denmark, and then we could watch 3 German TV channels as well. So that was my exposure to the world, right? And we'd watch American Western on German television. It was dubbed into German, so... What did I want to, in my early teens, what did I want to do? I think I was always interested in something, technical, mechanical. My dad was very much like he'd fix anything or whatever. So I was interested in that, but I didn't want to be like a mechanic or something. So as I grew a little bit old, like electronics started to gain my interest, right? Building circuit boards and stuff like that, right? And then that led into this telecommunication, IT kind of world. Right? I like the concept of building things, but very quickly, you cannot build electronics anymore because it's integrated circuits that are impossible to work on, right? So that's kind of where the start came. But real estate investing, no idea.
I love it. So what was your first deal of any type? Maybe it was something early in your career. Maybe it was your first real estate deal. Maybe it was something way before that. You tell me.
Yeah, no, it took a long time, right? So I moved to the United States 30 years ago, worked for different businesses and so on. So it wasn't until 10 years ago, so we're talking 2016, that I bought my first commercial deal. Yeah, we had bought houses and so on, but anything investment, real estate investment, that was not until 10 years ago. I bought my first fourplex in Albuquerque, New Mexico, for $117,000.
Fourplex, wow.
Yeah, imagine buying that at less than 30K a door, right? That was pretty amazing.
Wow, I love it. So what had you, so you had this long career in IT and telecom. You were doing that for a long time. What had you made the switch? What had you get into real estate in the first place?
After the intro, you mentioned this thing about freedom, right? So a couple of things started to happen when I was in my 40s. A couple of things. So my mother had passed at the age of 52. And I was like, man, I'm not that far away from 52 myself. Who knows? We have no guarantee of tomorrow. I like my job. I always liked my job. They were interesting, but I'm going into work 8 to 5 every single day, and I get a few weeks off. There's so many things I want to experience and still want to experience before it's too late or before I'm too old, right? So I wanted some freedom. I wanted to disconnect my time from my income. And the only way you can do that is by having assets that pay you money when you're sleeping and whatever, right? And then real estate, you can do it other ways. You could own a business, you can own, dividend stocks. But real estate was the one thing that actually made sense to me when we started. It wasn't that hard to wrap my head around, right?
Got it. Interesting. So one of the things that's interesting is like there are a lot of people out there that push real estate investment as passive investment. And then my experience when you speak to folks is like, if you think real estate investment is going to be purely passive from day one, unless you're just throwing money into someone else's fund or whatever, right? I mean, yes, at some point you can end up getting right money while you sleep, but most people I know in the space, and certainly when we did my own real estate investment, it's never truly passive, at least in the beginning, right? You got to identify the properties, you got to find them, you got to figure out the value in them. Even if you're hiring management, you got to hire management, right? Talk to me a little bit about that journey.
Yeah, I think there's like three types of investors. One is, as you said, you throw money at somebody else's fund, 100% passive, you have no control, and you hope that this operator is going to do well and so on. And this is the money that we have raised, right? That's one avenue. The second avenue is being like an owner-operator. Hey, you buy a few units, a single-family home, fourplex, whatever, and you do all the work yourself. It's next door, and the toilet breaks, you fix it. The tenant has a problem, you deal with it, right? You can't really scale because you're going to run out of time, but absolutely not passive at all. That is, a second job. And I think a lot of investors burn out there because they're like, oh my God, it's so much work, right? And they don't really make that connection. And then the third is really an investor, an active investor who, as you said, puts together the deals, raises the money, and then asset manages the deal after closing, right? So that's the category I put myself into, is that third category. And it's not passive, but I'm also not the property manager. The property manager is the last job I would ever want to have. Right? So we're managing the manager, we're managing to the business plan, right? And that's how we can scale, because we put people in place to manage. We manage that manager to that business plan.
Now, when you did your first fourplex investment, were you in the other category? Were you running that, or and was it your own money, or did you build like this model that you have now from first investment?
It was my own money. Me and my wife had been, good job saving. So we had money to buy it. I mean, we got some debt, but down payment. So here's the interesting thing, Corey. I was living in a small town in Colorado then, and I kind of looked around because people tend to start where they live, right? Is there something here that makes sense? We looked there. I guess luckily, no deals made sense where I was living. So I was forced, quote unquote, to buy out of my local town, actually out of state, because I was in Colorado. I bought in New Mexico.
Yes.
That was 4 hours away, or 3 hours. No, I can't manage that, 4 hours away. From day one, I put property management in place. And I think that saved my sanity because, property management is a really hard business. And as an owner, you have to stay on top of it, right? But there was no way I could have, because I already had a job, and there's no way I could deal with it. For a little while, actually, it's a little funny. For a little while, me and a buddy owned a small mobile home park out close to where we lived. And there was this thing, right? You were like having dinner on Sunday night, and the tenant calls, there's some problem. You're like, oh my God, you got to try to find a plumber or whatever. I hated that,
Yes, trust me, I get it. And even managing, some years back, partner and I put together, raised some capital in some small real estate investment funds and did some deals, multifamilies, a couple of small condo conversions. And on the multifamilies, having the right management in place was crucial. Not only did I not want to get the call when the toilet was backed up, or whatever, but also, just dealing with tenants. Even good ones. It takes a lot. It takes a certain skill. And I remember, we had a guy who had the amazing ability. He was, he had a small company. He was the most charming guy in the world until he didn't, until he had to be something else, right? With the tenants who were problematic. And we had buildings in the Bronx. And at that time, it was sort of shifting, but, you still had the risk of bad tenants coming in and dealing drugs out of the buildings and things like that, whatever. And it was certainly not, I didn't want to personally deal with any of that stuff. That's for sure.
Yeah. Absolutely. It is very stressful.
Yeah, love it. So, all right. So, talk to us about the journey a little bit, because obviously it's not, I think, most common, unless you're talking about somebody who comes in just as a professional investor and raises to start doing deals with your own money, right? And then some people move to the place where they're raising money on a per deal basis, right? You know, in SPVs or whatever, and then maybe they move to a fund. Talk about your journey in terms of moving to the model you have now from that first personal investment you made.
Yeah, so it took a few years, right? Started out with, I think in the first year, we actually bought 3 properties. We bought 2 fourplexes and 11 unit, but then we were kind of out of money, right? Because, hey, cash, gets tied up. And, yeah. So at that point, we're like, there's 2 avenues here. One is we wait, we improve those properties, we refinance them, we pull some cash out and we do the next thing. But I was like, no, I didn't have 20, 30 years to do this, right? I had a little bit accelerated timeline. So it's like, how do we go from being an investor to actually start creating a business out of this by bringing in private money, right, in the syndication type framework? So we started in 2018. So, roughly 2 years, less than 2 years in, we found a larger deal, which was the first one we needed some capital for, 38 units. I couldn't do it by myself. So I just talked to a couple of my friends and say, hey, are you guys interested in doing this together, right? So that was my first kind of like experience in putting a deal together with other people's money and so on, right? We still have that deal. What's that?
Let me just stop you for a second there, because this is a question I'm always interested in. I've done it myself. It is a jump when you go from using your own capital to other people's money, not only in the ability to go out and raise it, but now you got to deal with investors and even just the psychological. Like there are some people who just never would do that, because, there's a lot involved in being responsible for other people's money. It's one thing if you lose your own money, right? And that's not good. But there's a whole different dynamic when you lose other people's money. And many people start with friends and family where there's other implications in relationship, right? Talk to me about sort of that psychological piece of it and the willingness to do that. And like, how did you deal with that? Were you concerned? Like, what was that journey for you to decide to do that and get comfortable doing it? Or would do it maybe even if you weren't comfortable?
Yeah, I mean, you never take that lightly, right? Because it's people's hard-earned money and you are responsible for it. So the way I looked at it was like, well, first of all, I'm putting my own money alongside. So I'm risking my own funds.
Yes.
I'm telling my investors, like, there's no guarantees here. This stuff we could lose it all tomorrow, right?
Yes.
They need to understand the risk in there. And then also, the other thing I've learned over time is don't put all your money into one deal, right? Because, I mean, we have one deal we made 350% return on, and another one we lost investors' money, right? Because it was the wrong time to sell and had some problems. So it goes from, fantastic to not so good, right? But if you invest enough, you land somewhere in the middle that looks good, right? So there's that psychology around it. So I like the investors that put money into multiple deals because, they spread the risk and hopefully it works out, right? But yeah, the psychology of that has always been interesting because I feel like, I wouldn't do a deal up front if I wasn't comfortable and confident when I did it that this is going to work out, right? Why would we do a deal? Now the market changes and things impact it, right? And I also I had an early experience in that because that 38 unit I talked about, we were 5 people that came together to buy it, 2 of my friends, and then I had my broker partner and one of his friends. There was 5 of us did it. One guy is a doctor. He could care less how things are going. The other guy he wanted more control than he had because he was sort of passive, whatever. And he was freaking out. Every time I send him the financials, like, oh my God, what's going on? Why are we spending money here? Blah, blah, blah. I was like, after hearing him for 6 months freaking out, I was like, maybe it was even longer. I was like, all right, I love you. You're my friend. Why don't I buy you out of this investment? Because it's going to help me sleep at night. It's going to help you sleep at night. So I bought him out. And that damn deal is returning like it is such a cash cow right now. I don't tell him because I don't want to upset him. But so sometimes you do get those investors. And I think if you're out there raising money, pay attention day one. Are these people like, before you even raise money from them, are they nervous? Are they concerned? Are you convince them to do it? That's not that. They have to come to you willingly, right?
And the old joke, and there's some truth in it, is that often it's the smallest investors that are the ones who are the most high maintenance.
Yeah. That's why we, typically try to do from accredited investors who have a good net worth and good income so that, God forbid, something goes wrong, that's not their last dollar, right?
Right. So were you raising, do you still raise per deal, or have you put together a fund? Like how's that evolved?
Yeah, so we've always done per deal.
Yep.
Just because it seemed a little bit too complicated to put a fund together, because then you have to start identifying properties and try to lump them together and so on, right? Always been per deal. Yeah, that's more work on managing, I think we did 30 some deals, right? So it's always more work managing them, but never the fund structure. I am working with a client now. He's doing a fund on the debt side. So he wants to raise debt so that he can use that debt for his own projects and also for like fix and flip loans and so on, right? It's a little bit different. That's not single asset, but it's a different structure, right? But always per deal so far.
All right. And I want to get into some of the more of the consulting and client working and do. But before we go there, what did you do to learn? Right. Again, you're an IT guy, right? So now you decide you want more freedom. You're going to get into real estate. We hear many, many examples of people who move into real estate. They're very successful. We also, probably it's less touted, but there are examples of plenty of people who get in and it's a mistake or they don't do well. What did you do or was it something you were following, like in terms of the ability to analyze deals, know what to look for, not only in terms of cap rates and pricing or whatever, but, just all the other intangibles that come in on what make an investment in real estate successful or not? How did you get educated on that?
Yeah, so logical thinking, right, from being in IT, right? So I was always analyzed. So I started out by just reading every book I could get my hands on, listening to, 10 years ago, there weren't nearly as many podcasts, but listening to podcasts and learning, and then asking experienced people. So I remember when I first got started, read some books, and I was like, who do I know that's doing this, right? And for people listening, this is not this massive, complicated things. You just start with the knowledge you have, you educate yourself, and then you start looking at the network of people that can help you, right? So I called on my friend Gades, and I was like, hey, I know you invest. I don't know how this works. Can I buy you dinner, and can you walk me through it, right? And that led to us going from, we had a shared interest in something else to this, and he said, well, this is how you do it on the back of a napkin, and you need to call this guy up. He's going to help you. He loves to work with new investors and so on, right? And I think the key thing was, I had some spreadsheets and plugged the numbers in and so on and so forth. It's not that complicated on a small deal. Sure. And I took action, right? I took action because once you take action, you learn. You buy this $150,000 fourplex, and 2 months later, the water heater goes out. Right? It's like, well, here's $500 or whatever they used to cost. The main sewer line or water line broke. Well, here's a couple of $1,000s. Like, oh, okay, that's the shit. Excuse me. That's the stuff that happens that's going to throw you off, right?
Yeah. And obviously, if you didn't know this before, when you ran your projections, you budgeted for repairs and maintenance and
CapEx,
contingency, funds and reserves and whatever. But yeah, it's interesting. So has it been mainly in New Mexico that you continue to focus, or, did the investments expand out of there?
No, it was kind of, and I think maybe I didn't quite finish my last thought.
Yeah.
Then once I wanted to go into like the private equity, the syndication space, I then joined, like coaching group, a program, because I wanted to learn the bigger game, and I also wanted to get around more people that were doing that, right? Because I was living in a small town, well, not many people were doing it, so that forced me to travel. I would travel to these different conferences, and my knowledge started growing a lot in that way, right? Back to your question. No, we started out in Albuquerque because it was convenient. But once I got involved in this group I was just referring to, we started investing in other states, right? Because where were the deals? So we've done that. My most fantastic deal was in Phoenix. We bought at the right time. We sold at the right time. We did a deal outside Atlanta that also went really well. And then I met this guy at an event who was up in Pennsylvania and had been doing this for a long time. So him and I started partnering. So we bought stuff in Pennsylvania, in Ohio, actually in New York, upstate New York, and so on, right? Just because this was where we could get access to it. So it's been all over the place. I still live in New Mexico. I travel, of course, to the properties, but, we have a team that's on site to dealing with the day-to-day, right?
Okay. And you still own properties, right? You still do.
Not as many, but yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you've sold a lot of more. Okay. And what had you move more? Because I know, the bio talks about something that we talk about on the business side all the time. And Michael Gerber's E-Myth is like an entrepreneurial Bible around this for more operating businesses. This concept of, working on the business, not in the business, not having the business be dependent upon you. That applies across industries, not only in terms of real estate, but it's, on Remember Entrepreneurs Organization. It is like a fundamental principle of that's what everybody's trying to do, right? And you're right. I mean, many business owners struggle with that. So what had you, obviously it sounds like, you mentioned the geography and you got management involved even in your first deal, but it sounds like, you've had that kind of sort of mindset and understanding. And maybe it comes from that desire for freedom, right? Because obviously, So talk to me a little bit about sort of that journey and then how you work with folks around, that concept and helping them build their own
Yeah.
freedom,
I
through.
think it's a great question. Absolutely love the E-Myth, right? Now, I didn't work, my first job was for a smaller business. Everything else was large corporations. So systems and processes were in place because otherwise they would never have gotten to that scale, right?
Sure, sure.
It was already there, but what I realized when I moved up to managerial level and executive level and stuff, I realized that it was my responsibility to make sure my department or my group was running well, right? I had a lot of freedom, but it's still, at the end of the day, because we were running payroll systems, financial system, HR systems, that stuff had to be up and running 24/7, right? 365. So we had a lot of responsibilities for creating high quality, robust systems, IT systems. Well, that doesn't happen by accident, right? You put a lot of planning in there, you put a lot of redundancies and emergency plans and everything else in. So it came natural to me to put plans in place and systems and processes in place so that when we were installing large systems, we would not be guessing. We were doing it according to the plan, right? That was how I operated, and I thought that was normal. Then I come out into the entrepreneurial world, and it's like, oh my God, everybody's just by the seat of their pants, right?
Right. It's in their head. It's right.
Yeah, exactly. So I started seeing that. I was like, oh my God. Then I got really curious, right? E-Myth, traction about EOS and all this stuff. And I was like, okay, well, somebody had thought about this before. It's all documented well. The problem is the visionary business owner is not reading those books, or they may be, but they're not implementing it, right? And as I alluded to before, this partner that I have up there in Pennsylvania, great guy. He's a visionary. He's a people's person, and he had built a rather large portfolio, but he was just in it every single day. I was like, all right, buddy, let me help you get structured, right? I basically said, I'll do this, quote unquote, for free because you're my partner and you've been very generous to me. Let me do this work with you so I can learn it. You can get more organized, right? That started my journey towards, and this, years ago, right? This started my journey towards trying to use those skills I'd learned in my long career and put that into small businesses, right? That's where it started. And then as I started learning these things, right, I was like, oh, well, the more and more business I started seeing the same problems, and I would apply, and I was like, okay, well, now I have enough skills, I can go and actually sell my services to somebody, like starting small, right? So it's been really fun because I worked with gyms, I worked with property management companies, bakeries, a law firm, an auto shop, right? All these different businesses, they all have the same problem, right?
Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can tell you about an incredible resource my team and I have put together for you. Secrets of Deal-Driven Growth, Creative Ways to Grow Your Business Even in Challenging Times, is a powerful ebook that helps you take DealQuest Podcast episodes and apply them to your own life and business. This is the ideal tool for anyone looking for creative ways to grow as deal makers, and you can get yours now. It's as easy as heading to coreycupfer.com/workbook and downloading your copy. While you're there, you can also consider joining our dynamic deal-driven community of founders, experts, small business owners, and entrepreneurs. Now back to the show. I run a growing but still relatively boutique law firm, right? And I've had my own entrepreneurial journey around that. And we are systems heavy, and I'm not in the business. I've got a great team and whatever, and I'm out there, developing business, high-level strategy and structuring, and then I got systems and people who execute and implement. But it was a journey to get there, right? And there is, for me, it's always interesting because there is the external, what I call the external journey, which is like, just the learning and the execution, implementation, and putting in the systems and figuring out what you got to do. But there's also an internal journey piece, right? That I think some folks never get by. Like no matter how much information or education or systems or consultants or whatever they bring in, unless there's an internal shift, right? If you can't give up control, if you're a micromanager, if you don't trust people, if, whatever, if you don't use the systems that, somebody else put in for you, right? So talk to me a little bit when you work with these companies, like, is that your experience that's, the biggest block or opportunity is that visionary person and how
The
they,
visionary not letting go, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
The visionary not letting go. Yes. And this is something I like to, as I send out my weekly newsletter, I like to talk a lot about that because this is the biggest, well, not the, but one of the biggest problems that entrepreneurial companies have is that there's a strong leader, there's a strong visionary who created a business. And if they can't get out of the way of their next level management or whatever, their business will never grow because if all decisions have to go through them, if all like approvals and everything else has to go through them, they become this bottleneck, right? And they never have they're overwhelmed, they're stressed out, they're burned out, and their employees are just frustrated because like, oh my God, I got to ask the boss for everything. So that's one of the things, this is where we come back to this. Okay, are you willing to give up some of that control, right? It has to start with that mindset. Are you willing to give up? Are you willing to delegate and elevate your team so that your team can rise up? And because everybody's smart and want to do a good job, but you have to, allow for that growth, allow for some mistakes, allow for that freedom that, I guess, the accountability the freedom and accountability that goes hand in hand there and so on, right? Yeah. That's huge, right? And so it's funny, the broker that I did my first deals with, we partnered in a couple of deals. I've actually done some consulting with him because this gentleman, wonderful guy, he's 81 years old now or something. He owns like 1,000 apartment units himself. He's management company. He struggles to let go, but he's not going to be around forever. So I had a really frank conversation with him. It was last week. I said, all right, we need to find ways to start planning for succession. What is that going to look like, right? And I think he's starting to get it. So there's going to be some opportunity to talk about that, but it's going to be very hard for him to give up control. He's still in the office every single day from 7 to 6 p.m. or whatever, right?
Yeah, it's fascinating for me. Again, like our clients are all entrepreneurial growing companies, so I see it over and over again. I have my own personal journey and experience around it. And for me, like, I don't know, for whatever reason, I'm one of the folks who've adopted that, I can't give away enough soon enough. But it's just, that's much more my personality and, give people freedom. Yes, you hold people accountable for results, but I've never been a micromanager and things like that. And in fact, there's this concept, right, where people look to delegate up so that they don't take responsibility, right? And I'll often say to, some of my folks, although at this point, I have a lot of long-term people, so they've sort of, doesn't happen as much anymore because they know what I'm going to do. Like they'll come to me and say, hey, Corey, would you look at this, whatever? And I'll say to them, do you really need me to look at this? Like, is there something specific you need me to look at? And sometimes they'll be, yeah, can you just focus on this one thing I really want? Yeah, okay, great. But sometimes, a lot of times they'll just say, no, I think it's, like I'm, okay, good, send it out, like, it's funny, that dynamic, because it's not, a lot of it is from the top down, but there is this piece that's pushing upwards sometimes.
Yeah, and it's a fear of like, well, if I send it out, it's on me, right? There's that fear, because if the boss said, okay, it's his problem, right, and so on. I heard what you just said there. I heard somebody say this exact same thing, and what he also said is, are you willing to give me part of your salary to solve this problem for you?
Yeah, love that. So talk to me a little bit. I mean, it sounds like you mentioned that you're doing this not only in real estate, like, you mentioned property management, whatever, but also auto, like all these different areas. What are the commonalities? You said there's a lot in common. And what are the biggest areas? I mean, we identified one, right? The visionary not willing to let go. But what are the other factors that come into, the ones that successfully make this jump and are able to scale versus the ones who have more trouble?
Yeah, I mean, and I think it seems like you're living it, right? We get the owner, the visionary, to step out of the way a little bit, right? But we also get on a cadence of really, well, what are the, first of all, it's like, what's the accountability chart look like? What are your metrics? What are your processes? Get all those basic things in place. And then we train and mentor and coach. I like to coach the visionary, but sometimes they're not very coachable. So I like to go to one step, quote unquote, below to the leadership team and said, okay, this is how you show up to take responsibility, accountability, initiative, productivity, all these different things, right? So sometimes they haven't really learned to be a true leader because their boss or their owner always took away some of that initiative from them. Once we can get the boss to, or the owner to back off, and then we can start leveling up that next level, right? It's really hard, but as the owners start realizing that, that starts creating that freedom because now they're not coming and asking a single question or so on, right? So really look at that, right? And also hiring the right people, because hiring the people they may not be an expert in your business, but they need to have the aptitude towards responsibility and accountability and growth, right? I'm more interested in hiring for mindset and capability versus a specific skill, right? Yeah, if it's a doctor, I'll hire for the skill, an attorney, right? But for something more generic, maybe not so much, right?
Yeah. Love that. So it's been interesting, right? Because you've had, and again, I know you still have real estate going on, but, you had this IT phase one, you had phase two, the real estate investor, and now, maybe there are other phases that we've missed, but at least phase three, where you're doing this work with entrepreneurs and management teams, in various industries. I love when I see people evolve, especially when it's driven by the values that I align with. So, talk to me a little bit about, like, we talked about how you transitioned from IT into the real estate investment. What had you transition into doing this coaching and consulting stuff?
Yeah. So real estate doesn't take up my full day, right? And it's business has, as interest rates started changing and stuff, it was hard to find deals. So I wasn't as busy. Yeah, the real estate is giving income and long-term growth, but two things. I needed something to do, and it's nice to get the income from it. And I was like, I have all these skills I've learned from the IT career, now building this real estate. Let me help other people get benefit from it, right? And I think as we grow a little bit older, there's this idea of like service and giving back and sharing our knowledge. Like, you were sharing this podcast and guests on there. So, and then I was like super fascinated by this entrepreneurial space that I wasn't exposed to for so many years out of my life.
Yes.
That there's so many people with so many fun ideas and things like that, right? So now, I live in a small town. There's like roughly 20,000 people here, but there's a business incubator here that I'm now involved in, right? There's even an angel investing group here. There are, all these different things. I run my own meetup because it's so fascinating. I love to hear what people are doing, and, a lot of them got it going on. Others like, hey, it seems like I can give you some help and some support here, right? There's just this curiosity and there's this level of like giving back and helping and so on, right? So I love it, right? I do personal coaching too for individuals, right? Too. I love that because I've always liked to help level people up, and coaching has personally helped me a lot, right? So does that make sense? Does that kind of explain where I'm coming from?
No, it totally does. And it's, it's interesting because there's a lot that aligns with so what I care about and what excites me. And one of the things I've loved about my entire career working, well, except in the very, very beginning when I was at big law firms, but certainly since I've had my own firm, which is since 1992, working with entrepreneurial and growing companies, it's that same thing. It's not, I mean, listen, to some extent, the big firms that do the same bond deal over and over and over again, it's good business. It's repeatable business from big companies that pay a lot of money. But that's just not interesting to me. And I'm not saying we don't do things. I mean, we do a lot of M&A transactions, and we do, but it's in different industries, or even, within given industries where we do a lot of work. It's just, every firm's different. Their values and vision are different. But what's in common is that they're founders and visionaries and entrepreneurs, and they've got this energy, and they built something often from nothing. Sometimes, maybe it's next generation, or it's, they bought something, but still they have this desire to grow. And it's just like, I want to be around that energy. It aligns with my energy. I've been, there's a reason I hung out a shingle at age 31 with no clients, and left big law, because I just more aligned with, entrepreneurial journey and risk was more aligned with my personality. So I definitely get it. I identify with it. It's, it's fun to be around folks, so whether it's, my clients or, people I mentor, and you're right. I mean, listen, do we end up keeping top of mind and getting, I don't want to be disingenuous here. This helps us keep top of mind. Does it get us some business? Absolutely. Do we get some business from listeners? Sure. Do we build a great relationship with guests? And sometimes that turns into business? Sure. I think you can have multiple purposes. And one of the things that I do get a huge amount of satisfaction out of is being a resource and providing information to folks that help encourage them be more successful at entrepreneurial journeys and, coming up with these cool ideas in areas that I had no idea be involved in, or maybe it's an industry I know, but they're doing it differently. Building a business, employing people, and trust me, I get it. I'm so aligned with that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's cool, right? There's a big world out there that it's funny, right? When the balloon expands because we know more, we realize there's so much more we don't know, right? So
Yes. This is like a total aside, but it's sort of this parallel to, I joke about my travel bucket list. Somehow, no matter how many places I travel in the world, the list gets longer, not shorter. Because you learn about, all these other places. Well, that would be cool to go to. That would be.
Where was the most recent place you traveled to?
Actually, internationally, a couple of years ago loved the trip to Japan. I hadn't been to Japan in years. I just had a friend who went to Morocco. I was there the year before. That was a great trip. And believe it or not, last year, in all the places I'd been in the world, I had never been to Hawaii.
Oh.
It's so funny how you have these things where, I grew up in New York, so it was a little longer trip, but I've been in California for a decade, and how I never went to Hawaii. So that was cool. But I can go on and on. I love travel.
That's funny you mentioned Japan. We just got back from there 2 weeks ago. Me and my wife went for our 25th wedding anniversary, so we just got back. So that was fun too.
Oh, fantastic. Had you been there before?
Never. No, I've been to Asia before, but not Japan. So
Yeah. No, for me, that's a special place. Fascinating culture.
absolutely.
It was a great trip. We loved it. Yeah. Awesome. All right. So anything else before I ask you my final two questions, and I know this is a very broad question, but are there any particular sort of trends or interesting things going on, whether that's on the real estate side, whether it's on the entrepreneurial side, that you're seeing? We live in interesting times. It's funny because there's so many conflicting things going on, right? But it's one of the things I love about the entrepreneurial journey is that it keeps going ahead. The stock market's been relatively strong. You've got all kinds of money out there, dry powder and a lot of money in a lot of industries. Yet some of them have been really shaken and affected, whether it's by, tariffs or war or whatever, right? I'm not asking you to comment on the political side of it, but in this environment, is there anything particularly interesting or trends you're seeing or things that, you think the listenership might be interested in hearing?
Yeah, if we stay on where we started on the real estate, right? So as inflation rose in 2022, 23, interest rates started rising, costs started rising. That really created a lot of challenges around making profit on apartments and so on, right? So we pivoted towards industrial, light industrial, flex space, and so on, because there was a niche that we were able to kind of get into, right? So we haven't grown to this 100,000 square feet you talked about in the intro, right? So we did some of that. Also, we actually kind of did a couple of things. Let's get more local. Let's get a little bit more control over it. Let's do something that's easy. And oh my God, it's so much easier to manage commercial than it is to manage, apartments and so on. So we went back in there because we realized that there was that's different in every market, right? You're in California, it's probably, demand is high, but in Albuquerque, for whatever reason, very low industrial vacancy, 2 or 3%. For smaller stuff, the Amazon 400,000 square foot, that's not the business we're in. It's more a few thousand, 20, 30, 40,000 square feet, right? But there was low vacancy there. Cap rates were high, meaning you could buy it for a relatively good price and so on. So we went into that. And that's really a space I love because, if the economy goes down the tubes, that could change. But generally, businesses, if you have good businesses like plumbers, electricians, those types of things, there's a huge demand for that and they need some space. And if we can be the provider of that space, we are in a good shape. So that's kind of where I'm looking. We just sold a deal after 18 months and made a great return on that and so on, right? So that's the space I like now and we'll continue to focus on that,
Right.
But I'm becoming less active on the real estate. I'd rather maybe passive invest and focus on where my passion is a little bit more on the coaching and consulting and so on.
Love that. So on the coaching and consulting side, who's an ideal client? I know we talked about different businesses and entrepreneurs generally, but whether it's by size, by industry, by geography, or anything else.
Yeah, no particular industry, no, not high tech or biotech, but kind of your average average business that is relatively easy to understand. I would say, small, maybe it's $1 million, maybe it's a couple $1 million of revenue, that entrepreneurial business where the owner's still running a lot of it, right? But the owner's like, I can't scale myself anymore, right? So that's the ideal business for me, right? I've worked with solo entrepreneurs that need to grow. I've worked with people, that have a handful, 20, 30, 40 employees. That's kind of the niche there, right? I love to work with them because I can still get access to the owner and start changing the mindset of the owner versus, huge corporation where the owner or the CEO is way up there, right?
Yeah, great stuff. So if people want to find out more about what you're doing now, whether it's on the real estate side or on the coaching and consulting side, where should they go?
Just go to my personal website. It's my first name, Jens, last name Nielsen, Nielsen.us, jensnielsen.us. There's a link to book a quick intro call. My phone number, my email is on there, and while I advocate hiring people, I'm just myself. So I'm easy to reach that way, or LinkedIn or so on,
Excellent. So Jens, obviously we sort of previewed a little bit of this because we talked about freedom a little bit already, but my final question on the podcast is always about my highest value in life, which is freedom. And for me, that means everything from freedom around the world for people from oppression to why I've been an entrepreneur for decades and haven't had a boss. What does freedom mean to you, and how does it impact your life and business?
So for me, it means that I can go and put time into the things that I find valuable and interesting, right? I will work hard, but, Friday rolls around, I'm going to take Friday off and I'm going to spend time with my wife or go and ride my bike, or ideally is, traveling back to my home country, visiting with family or meeting them somewhere, right? And those are the things the last 10 years has allowed me to do because I did make the shift,
Love that. Jens Nielsen, thanks for being such a great guest on the DealQuest podcast.
Thanks, Corey. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. If you are interested in finding out more about my law firm, the services we provide to entrepreneurial and growing companies across industries all over the country, and my partner Brian Megan and I, and my amazing team, just head over to kupferlaw.com. That's kupferlaw.com. And if you want to follow more of my content, head over to my LinkedIn page where I post regularly. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.